True Crime with me, Emma Kelly. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I release content on a Wednesday and a Sunday at the same time. So just take a moment to press that button, please. Today I'm going to be covering a case that's really local to me. It was a really brutal case and equally as complex when you unravel the reason that the individual who was murdered died. Because if you could ever be a more innocent individual, Sadie Hartley was that completely innocent individual who was caught up in a love triangle that really she had no place in. She wasn't really a part of it, but nonetheless, her involvement with her partner essentially led to her doom. And I've covered this case for lots of reasons. One, because it does feel very present. I drive past where she used to live. Her home was resold actually not so long ago, and I remember kind of looking at it and imagining, would I want to live somewhere that somebody had been brutally murdered in the hall? Just asking myself that question. Understandably, it sold for less money than the going rate in that estate, but nonetheless, I always ask myself those questions. Would you want to live in the home where somebody had lost their life in such a brutal and disturbing manner? So this case is about the murderer, Sarah Williams, and also her co-conspirator as well. We're going to take a look at what led to the crime. We're going to focus on the variables that, in my opinion, led Sarah Williams from going from a relatively obsessive lover to a cold-hearted killer. What were the things that activated the antisocial personality potential that had, to some degree, laid silent up until the murder of Sadie Hartley? The murder itself took place on the 14th of January 2016 in Helmshore. Like I said, 10 minutes at the most away from me. It seemed incredibly random. 60-year-old Sadie Hartley was a very successful businesswoman. She was somebody who was incredibly loved by her friends, her colleagues, pretty much anyone who knew her, an incredible loving mother. And the reason that the murder was discovered was basically she didn't go into work. And it was highly unusual, and the consequence of that was her work rang the police and asked for a welfare check. The police then, understandably concerned about potentially her being ill or worse, attended her house, looked through the letterbox, and it was then that they saw that there was a woman face down in a pool of blood. And at that point, the police were informed that they were not dealing with somebody who required a welfare check or an ambulance because they'd fallen ill, that they were in fact dealing with a very, very serious and brutal murder case. That murder case would involve 41 separate stab wounds. So you can imagine what the officer who attended that scene was met. It's not what anybody expects. Doesn't matter how long you've been in the police force, you don't ever expect to come across a scene like that. And in fact, the officers who did discover it, and subsequently the officers who came to that scene, talk about it being pretty much the most brutal scene that they have ever witnessed in their entire career. And some of these detectives had been in the force for way over 30 years. So these are hard-line, well-versed coppers who have worked the beat for a long time and have seen a lot of injuries, a lot of awful scenes, but this took the biscuit. What makes this equally challenging is that, of course, Sadie was known as a really wonderful woman. Her children in particular talk about her being the idyllic mother. She was always kind. Her children say that she never ever rowed with them. In fact, she was the person that even in conflict would try to see a way to communicate quietly, compassionately, and to bring closure to more challenging situations. So when you think about an individual with such a low conflict attitude and personality, it beggars belief that she could end up dying in such a hideously brutal, abusive attack. As I've said, what makes this even worse is that nobody ever deserves to die. Of course they don't. There is no gradient of, well, that human wasn't quite as good as that human, therefore it's less of a problem that they died. But it provokes something, doesn't it, when the person that you talk about is known to be an utterly lovely human being. Sadie was a mother who was known to be unbelievably compassionate, incredibly peaceful. As a co-worker, she was known to always be the person who could resolve conflict. She considered the people that she worked with great friends, and she was so successful. And I always think that when you've made it in business, it can change you. I've worked with a lot of people who've made it in business, and some of the traits that they have aren't the greatest. They come from a place of quite aggressive attitude. They're the kind of people who'll step on another human being to get where they want to go. Sadie is the complete counter to that. She's made it in spite of her loving, caring persona. And that adds to this feeling of a life that had so much worth and also so much potential, so much positive impact on the world, that it exacerbates the wound of that loss. And when I've heard her children talk about her, you see that open wound is very much a part of who they are now. In fact, her daughter says the loss has ruined their lives. And I can completely empathise with that. I can completely empathise with losing your parent traumatically, as I have my father. It does ruin your life. That isn't asking for people to feel sorry for me. It's an acknowledgement that for anybody who goes through a traumatic loss, it completely transforms who you are and your lived experience. And I really connect with her daughter when she talks about that. So let's look at who had the audacity and the psychopathy that was needed to snuff out the life of such an incredible human being. Let's take a look into the psyche of Sarah Williams. Who was she? Well, first of all, I've tried to do a lot of research on Sarah Williams to find out about who she was, how she was brought up, and whether there was any indicators that we were looking at somebody who was going to be seriously dangerous to our society. It's quite difficult. Often you'll find that if people haven't been involved in the criminal justice system, social services, if there hasn't been any marked abuse in the family, there is limited access to find out about who they were. So what can I tell you about Sarah Williams? So one of the things is that she was an only child. Now I know that lots of you listening will be only children. You'll be lovely, empathic human beings who only care compassionately about your fellow man. But let's just play with this a little while and say that sometimes, only children can be a little bit entitled. When you're growing up being spoiled potentially, because you're the only child, where your needs are always catered for. This isn't a good situation, and I'm not condemning parents who do that. Of course we want to spoil our children, but I'm just saying if there is a little bit of a personality disorder where you may have a little bit of narcissism, then when you get very entitled and you get your needs met constantly, it's not a great recipe, because it leads to a demanding, expectant human being. So I'm just going to play with that only child potential there. She was born to Christopher and Barbara, and she was brought up in Bebington in Merseyside. She was also sent to a private school, so obviously they had a relatively good standard of living. Arguably, you could say that she was probably at least academic enough to thrive in that kind of circumstance. And she wasn't particularly bullied, but we have to acknowledge she did have quite a severe drooping eyelid. If you've ever seen the singer Gabrielle, she has the same condition as Gabrielle. Gabrielle tends to wear a black patch over her eye because the world isn't a kind place to people who are different. And even though the bullying wasn't noted or notable, I would argue that it's pretty impossible to go through school with any form of disability without it being pointed out. So I'm not going to say that the school was noting her bullying, but I would be utterly spellbound if she hadn't experienced some kind of negativity for the way her eyelid looked. And often if we feel that we are noticed for these kind of things, we often want to deflect that. We want to find other ways of being noted. Also, it can mean that we want to feel attractive, and that can mean that we look for validation in places that we aren't getting. Particularly if our peers aren't giving us that validation attraction-wise, we're going to look elsewhere. And I have to say, I think Sarah Williams did that from a very, very young age. When you look at the evidence of her childhood, allegedly there was no trauma. However, At 13 years of age, she basically said she was a victim of kidnapping and sexual assault. That was in January 1995. It made the front page news and suggested that she was abducted. She was riding a bike home from Wirral Riding Centre in Chester, which is where she spent a lot of her life because she was passionately involved in horse riding and she loved that aspect of her world. And when she was cycling home, she said she was knocked off a bike and then she was given this incredibly traumatic experience. She was basically taken from a bike, locked in the boot of a Vauxhall Cavalier, driven to a house where she was blindfolded walking to the house so she couldn't see where she was going. And then she sustained a relatively long sexual assault, which would be understandably horrendously traumatic and very forming. When you're 13 and you're going through a situation where sexually you're not ready, secondly you're being violated, your life's being put in danger, you cannot get more terrifying than that. She then said that after this very vicious sexual assault, he put her back in the boot and then he dumped her in the remote countryside about 30 miles from her home. So just about as traumatic as you could get. And she was basically picked up by a passing lorry driver. So she was on the M6, just wandering around, obviously in a traumatized state. She was picked up and taken to a place of safety. That made the front page news. There was a major police investigation. But during that investigation, they didn't turn up any evidence and they didn't find anyone that was alleged to have been the suspect or found guilty of that particular incident. But we have to imagine for Sarah Williams that would have been a transformative experience. Now, if you look at what people said about this, and a lot of people said stuff about this, she wasn't believed. So people that she went to school with called her a liar. In fact, adults who knew her said that she was a complete fantasist. Even the owner of the riding centre that she attended said, Sarah Williams is a complete fantasist. This is something that she's made up. She's a liar. And allegedly, although I can't confirm this, her false claims were the talk of the Wirral. People were obsessed with this 13-year-old girl who had made out that she had been horribly assaulted when there was no base, in their opinion, to those claims. And indeed, let me tell you, if she had made that up, that is a pretty big thing to make up. Firstly, you're wasting a lot of police time. Secondly, you're leading to other girls in situations where that has really happened not being taken as seriously, which is a terrible thing to do. And most importantly, what is it about your personality that is seeking the validation of others to see you as a victim? What is happening in your brain that is making you seek that kind of affirmation? That is deeply disturbing. And if we left it there, as much of the press have, I think we would all agree that Sarah Williams is already forming into a dangerous personality. But I also want to note that in the month after that attack, another girl was abducted in almost an identical incident. So I don't want to take it away from Sarah Williams. I'm not going to give her any excuses for her behaviour. But I'm not going to just play into this idea that that incident wasn't real. An exact identical incident within a month of that took place and another young girl was abducted and assaulted in exactly the same way. That, to me, suggests that there could have been truth. I cannot validate that. None of us know. But I'm not going to ignore it because I have enough to paint Sarah Williams in a negative picture. I don't want to take away from a child that may have been hideously abused, or the ramifications of that abuse happening and then the individual not being brought to justice. What does that activate in Sarah Williams' brain? If somebody can violently assault you, kidnap you, dump you, walk away without any sentence, without even being incriminated, what does that teach you about crime? Could it be that that early experience of Sarah Williams going through a traumatic experience and not having the perpetrator taken to court, prosecuted and sent to prison. Could that have created this belief that it is possible to get away with murder? Just putting it out there. Because, like it or otherwise, you can be a fantasist and you can still be assaulted. You can be a fantasist and you can still get horribly abused by people. And I often have to ask myself, what lays the foundations for people to act in the way that they act? And is this one of those foundations? Also, I wonder whether this is where the really over-needy and possessive desire for men begins, because wow, there is definitely a thread that we can take through this, which is Sarah Williams is your nightmare girlfriend. She really is. She is one of those human beings who repeats her patterns again and again and again. Attention-seeking, possessive, desperately needy. Your husband is not safe around a woman like Sarah Williams. Also, it's worth noting that at 13 years of age, around the time that that abduction was meant to have occurred, she's also known to be seeing a much older married man. People talk about that in the press and also in documentaries as if this was just something that she was engaged in on a voluntary basis. Now, I appreciate that at 13 years old, you might think you're 35 and know everything about the world, because that's what 13-year-olds do, don't they? They think they know everything. They think they're growing up. They think they're adults. But we all look back at 13-year-olds and are like, you wouldn't let them drive your car. Most of us wouldn't let them make food because it's probably not going to turn out well. Young people think that they know and want a lot of stuff, and it's our job and duty as adults to protect them. That's why the law exists. You cannot consent to a relationship with a married man. It blows my mind that people who were at the riding centre that apparently she would disappear into a horse box with this older married man didn't ring the police straight away. There is something bizarre about the 90s and 80s. There was this complete allowance of these inappropriate relationships to thrive, as if it was the norm. Think of Bill Wyman and Mandy Smith, a guy from the Rolling Stones, a 13-year-old child. Basically, it was known that they were in a sexual relationship from when she was 13. Nothing ever happened apart from it royally screwed up Mandy Smith. There was this acknowledgement that there was this normality about older men and younger girls, really younger girls. These days it would be called out in an instant, but back then it didn't seem to be. So she's having this clearly sexual relationship with a married guy, massively inappropriate. And again, massively letting down Sarah Williams. Sarah Williams is being let down at this point. Apparently she used to have sex in the horse box. And one of the things that people said when they were talking about the fact that she'd been abducted was that actually she'd just gone and spent a weekend with this lover, as if it's a lover, this child molester, obviously, and that she'd gone away for the whole weekend and wanted to get away with it. So needed to create this ruse that she'd been abducted. Now, as I've noted, Sarah Williams was a really keen rider. She was a great rider. She continued to attend the Wirral Horse Riding Centre. Now, this is where fate collides and she meets a co-conspirator, Katrina Walsh. She's known as Kit. I am going to note as well, side note, some say that her and Kit did have a sexual relationship. I can't qualify that. It's hearsay. I would say that Katrina Walsh was absolutely obsessed with Sarah Williams. She really was. So there is something deeply unhealthy about watching the way that their relationship was. I also want to note that during the time that she met Katrina and she was a younger woman, her parents split up. So when she's a teenager, Sarah's parents split up, and at this point Katrina and her become very, very close friends. And around the time of 17, we have another moment in Sarah Williams' life that is essentially going to change it. Maybe for the better, who knows? But at 17, she meets David Hardwick. He's an incredibly successful businessman. He's only 3 times her age. He's only 57. Completely normal. What 17-year-old isn't looking at a 57-year-old and thinking, totally relationship type, particularly married? Great, let me think about the variables I want in my life. A man who's 3 times older than me and definitely in a relationship. Does that show vulnerability in Sarah Williams? Possibly. Does it show manipulation in Sarah Williams? Possibly. You know, it could be that she saw a very rich man and looked at a meal tickets. We all know about sugar daddy sites. There are lots of people out there who want to have an easy time by letting an older lover make sure that their life is better. And certainly for Sarah Williams, that absolutely paid off. He was a very successful and rich businessman. He had children and he became her sugar daddy right up until her arrest. So right up until her arrest when she's 17 years old, he is paying for her life. She had a life completely beyond her means because of him. He used to give her £323 a week, and wait for it, he had a wife. Just blows my mind, this. He took her on 12 holidays a year. How does a married man get away with taking a partner for 12 holidays a year, whilst giving £323 a week, on top of giving her £75,000 to put a down payment on her home that actually was half the cost of her home? That's not a bad amount of money, is it, to get from your lover? Also, he loaned her £43,000 that she didn't pay back, which in my book means it wasn't a loan. It just was money given to her. So she is really working that relationship. And it's important to note that she was literally with him till the day that she was arrested. His wife knew about the affair. That mind blows me. Maybe his wife was just having fun elsewhere. I hope if you're watching this and you're his wife, you were just having lots of fun with younger men and using his money so that you could also have the life of Riley that he was having. But basically his wife did know about the affair, and at 5 o'clock every single morning, David would leave the marital home and go to Sarah Williams and crawl into bed with her. So at 5 a.m. every morning, that would be what happened. He was 75 when they arrested her. Well, obviously still a healthy elderly man, if nothing else. I doubt he was just going there to have a nap. Although who knows? This is just hearsay. I'm just throwing my own ideas on the potential of what could have been going on there. So as we know, Sarah is one of those people who has access to a lot more money than she relatively should have. Yes, she works, but she's also funded on the bankroll by her sugar daddy. Part of me is a little bit jealous at that point. I'm like, could you imagine some just giving you money in your relationship? Just feels so unfair. No disrespect to my other half. But basically, she's always looking for new things to do. She's active, you know, she's a horse rider, she's into fitness. And one day, she's driving past the Chill Factory. Now, that is, again, about 35 minutes away from me. It's one of those indoor ski, snowboarding, snow play places. I used to take the kids there quite a lot when they were kids to do snow play and climbing. And she drives past it and thinks, you know what, I wouldn't mind learning to ski. Maybe one of the 12 holidays my sugar daddy takes me on will be one to Aspen. I don't know. I think Aspen's where one of them goes. Sounds posh enough. The point is, she thinks this could be something that I could add to my repertoire that I could then use on holiday, no doubt. And really, this is where the fateful story begins to play out. She goes and starts training, and she's a natural. She's that good, that popular, that engaged, that passionate about it. Remember, she's quite an obsessive personality, so she does get obsessed by it. And she ends up getting a job with the travel agents called Crystal Sky Travel Agents. That's at the Chill Factory. So suddenly she's immersed in this world. And obviously skiing attracts quite a lot of men, and also quite a lot of ski instructors, shall we say. And before we know it, she's in a relationship with a ski instructor. He's known as Old Master A. His actual name is Somapat Sitwachana. I'm only going to call him Old Master A because it's hard remembering how to pronounce the other name. So he starts an affair with her. He's 47 years old. Again, we have this constant older man syndrome. What is that saying about her psychology? She's looking for a protector. She's looking for somebody who can find her, shall we say, more attractive than maybe her peers because she's a younger person. So does she get that adoration? Is she seeking that constant validation? I think she probably is. And older men give her that. Also, she's a younger, very sexual person. We know that she's incredibly good at using her sex and the orientation of her sexuality to bring men into her world. And if you're a 47-year-old guy who's married, it might be that that burns some passion into your love life that you might not have. I'm not saying that's the case, but certainly she uses seduction. And we see that with certain killers. Seduction is a part of their play. In fact, Joanne Danahay is another one who uses seduction to invite people into her world to get what she wants, to manipulate situations. That relationship with Master A lasts 12 months. And the reason that he cites for their breakdown in a relationship is she's just incredibly clingy, incredibly needy, very jealous, very possessive. And you don't have a right to be possessive and jealous when you're having an affair. The very point of the fact that you're having an affair is that you acknowledge they are in a relationship with someone else. The only person who gets to be jealous in that situation is the wife who's being betrayed. But it shows you the way that she's thinking, ownership, possessiveness. This person that she is with consumes her. She wants them for herself. And she does some pretty awful things. In fact, she gets Katrina, her co-conspirator in this whole situation, to place foam in his exhaust pipe, and she actually slashes his tyres. And also, the pièce de résistance in this is that she goes to his house and tells his wife. That is Glenn Close from Fatal Attraction stance, isn't it? We're moving into stalking territory. She also would sit outside his house for hours in her car. She then sent a letter where she said she was pregnant. So she sends a letter after going to the house, after trying to break the relationship up, and she actually sends a letter saying that she's pregnant. She's lying. That plays into some of the beliefs that people have about her being a fantasist. I acknowledge that. But it also shows that art of manipulation. She wants to break them up. She wants to cause as much pain if she can't break them up. And obviously saying she's pregnant, it's going to cause some issues. The fact that she isn't pregnant means that she's not thinking about the consequences for herself in the long term. She wants to cause as much pain and suffering because she's being denied. She goes as far as to send a friend of hers ultrasound. So she wants to be that convincing. It gets to a point where her sitting outside his house is just damn right creepy, harassing, stalkerish. And I would imagine that his wife is also starting to feel a little bit afraid because that is not normal behaviour. And so his wife tells the police and she's asked to stop. That is the point where she desists. And that should have been a very strong reality for Sarah Williams, that kind of behaviour is something that can cause her long-term problems. However, it feels like it just puts that kind of self on hold, and that she doesn't manage the issues and consequences that she should have related to when the police had come round. For most of us, the idea of the police coming around and saying, hey, you're being a bit weird, stop sitting in that car outside the house, and being pretty much harassing and stalkerish to these people, you'd be like, behaviour probably went a little bit too far, probably need to back off from that. Maybe spend some of that money that I've just been given by my sugar daddy on some therapy. How about trying that? But no, Sarah Williams doesn't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with her. She does, however, tell friends that she considers herself a psycho and a she-devil, her words. So one thing we can say about Sarah Williams is she is quite insightful. She is, in fact, a psycho and a she-devil, it would seem. As I've said, just using her words, but we should at least allow her the acknowledgement that she is entitled to that kind of assessment of herself. And I won't remove myself from it. I think she's on the money. Then she goes on to meet a guy called Andy Pools. She's actually on holiday with David, her sugar daddy. She's actually away on holiday, taking his money, being paid for, having an affair with a married man already, where she meets another guy to have an affair with. Again, this relationship ends, but it's slightly different because Andy Pools wants Sarah Williams to leave her sugar daddy for him. And Sarah is like, I'll have you as a lover, but I'm not having you as a partner because I've got it working good right here. Again, the psychology of that, what does that say? So she is using David without a doubt because he is providing her with this luxurious lifestyle. And even when she's offered the opportunity to have something that we believe she'd be craving, that's why she was stalking people, because she wanted the relationship to end. But when she's given the opportunity, it seems that she wants to have her cake and eat it. She doesn't want to cease the payments from her lover. It's paying her well and it's serving her well. So we're walking into this situation now where we're seeing a more manipulative woman. So she's exploiting situations for her own benefit. During her time at Chill Factory, she has lots of affairs. They all tend to end quite quickly because of her behaviour. She's constantly needy, she's constantly obsessive, and people don't like that. It's a very disconcerting feeling when you're in a relationship with somebody and they start suffocating you. And I think that's the word that I would associate with Sarah Williams. She's a suffocating personality. 2012 is where really the fateful beginning that leads to the end of this journey happens. It's when she meets Ian Johnston. Ian Johnston is a retired fireman. He's also known as a hero. He's won commendations for the work that he's done. He has been married in the past. He married a woman called Jackie. They had a girl called Hannah, but his relationship didn't work out. He got divorced, and during the period of getting divorced, he meets a fellow divorcee, and that is Sadie Hartley. They actually meet in 2002, so that's a good decade before he meets Sarah Williams. They're both going through their divorces. Sadie is an incredibly successful businesswoman. She's very much at the beginning of that journey, but she's exceeding in the work that she does. Sadie has 2 children from a divorce, and they both get together, and they're living in Cheshire at the time. So Ian and Sadie didn't have the consistency in their relationship. They were kind of up and down. And in 2011, so 9 years after they initially met, they are on a break. And on that break, Ian Johnston meets Sarah Williams. That's because he becomes a ski instructor at the place where she's working. And they pretty immediately start an affair. They kind of connect at work, start texting, then it becomes sexting, and then very quickly it escalates to a sexual relationship. It isn't a long relationship, because guess what? I know I can hear you all saying it. That's right. She was too needy. She was too possessive. She's got a sugar daddy on the go, but she wants more. She wants this lust. She wants this value of being desired. And when you're having an affair, often those initial experiences are just that. You are on their mind 24/7. You are who they revere. You are all they're thinking about. It's a very alluring experience. And if you're needy and you feed on that, then that's something that's going to be like a drug for you. So Sarah Williams is enjoying that being wanted. But of course, because Ian Johnston isn't that engaged in that relationship, he sees her as a sex object to some degree, someone to have sex with, but not necessarily engage in a really long-term relationship with. It's not turning out in the way that Sarah Williams wants. And by the summer of 2013, Ian Johnston goes back to Sadie Hartley. This is where we start getting into problem territory, because Sarah Williams is not ready to let Ian Johnston go. She's certainly not ready to have an older woman take the man that she set her eyes on. During this period of time, Sadie and Ian's relationship start to gather in strength. They go on a 22-day trip to Ecuador together, and it feels like this cemented a new beginning. However, gotta say, Ian Johnston's still communicating with Williams. I don't want to blame Ian Johnston. I know that at the end of the day, people have relationships and affairs constantly. It doesn't mean that you want any harm to befall your partner, but you are playing with fire when you are having relationships that you shouldn't be having, because he's in a committed relationship to Sadie, and yet he's still keeping up this sexual explicit texting with Sarah Williams. That is confusing on both levels, and it does mean that he isn't fully committed, and it does mean that he's keeping Sarah Williams dangling on a piece of string. Now, an absolutely bizarre piece of information that I've got to share with you is that in December 2013, Sarah Williams and her sugar daddy David and Sadie and Ian Johnston are all on holiday in the same resort. They're all on holiday in the same resort at the same ski hotel. Mind-boggling. And during that period, Ian Johnston and Sarah Williams are texting each other, constantly explicit text. There is a really weird one where they talk about the fact that Sarah Williams loved foot cuddling with Ian Johnson under the table. So my imagining there is that at some point they kind of all met up and had a meal together, unbeknown, clearly, to Sadie that there was anything going on. But that disturbs me. That really does. I mean, the idea that you would meet up with the person who was a lover with your partner and actually engage in some kind of physical canoodling during that experience is disconcerting, it's tasteless, and it's classless. And I've watched Ian Johnson talk about Sadie and his love for her, but I do think that he needs to bear some responsibility regarding how he enabled this to become the situation that it became. He obviously is not responsible for the murder of Sadie at all, but the honesty just wasn't there, was it? And the stringing somebody along who already has possessiveness and obsessiveness within their psyche is not a good formula. It's not a good recipe for success. By the following summer, so that's 2014, Sadie and Ian's relationship has become stronger. They're starting to think about living with one another. They want to make this more of a committed relationship. And this is when Sarah Williams starts to go back to that old behaviour that we've seen previously. She is not happy. She wants to break them up. It's as simple as that. I'm not even sure whether she wants Ian Johnston. What I think is she doesn't want Sadie to have him. She doesn't want another woman winning. I think that within her psyche she has this staunch belief that no other woman should win compared to her. So she writes Sadie a letter. She lets her know about the affair and she sends it directly to her. And guess what? Does it break them up? Absolutely not. In fact, both Sadie and Ian say that this is a turning point in their relationship. This is the point where they say to each other, you know what, this is make it or break it. We want this to work. And it's the light bulb moment where they decide, let's figure this relationship forward. Imagine how infuriating that would be for Sarah Williams. There she is, imagining that she can manipulate and destroy this relationship, that she can have power over these two people, and that they will pay for her not getting what she wants. And then suddenly, she finds out that firstly, it hasn't worked. And secondly, it's led to Ian and Sadie deciding they want to move in with each other. That's in Helmshore, Sunnybank Road, just 10 minutes away from me. So not only has she failed to break the relationship up, she's helped them solidify it. So they move into this beautiful home. It's a gorgeous home, really big, lovely home in Helmshore. And it's a new beginning. I am going to note, though, that Johnston still texts Sarah Williams during this period of time. So there isn't an absolute ceasing to it. I imagine that Sarah Williams, in spite of the fact that she's done this horrible bunny boiler type thing, is still hoping that he's going to want to see her. She sends naked photos to him, and he does the same to her. Just going to say to all of you listeners, not okay. Don't do that to an ex. When you're in a committed relationship, that's not what you do. It's disrespectful to your partner, and it's disrespectful to the person that you're actually having a relationship with, because you're not in a situation where you can offer them any kind of commitment. I think he should feel really guilty for doing that. He led on a very dangerous woman. He is not responsible. I appreciate that. But I'm not going to forgive him for that, because our actions have consequences, and his actions definitely had some consequences. We do know there were periods where they didn't text each other, but it seems that in 2015, when they bump into each other again at the Chill Factory, that's where they start to reignite their relationship a little bit. Like I said, when you play with fire, there is a potential that you'll get burnt. If I had been Ian Johnson, I would have thought Sarah Williams has a screw loose. She didn't just not accept the fact that I'd broken up with her. She sent a letter to my partner and tried to ruin our relationship. Is it just me who thinks that that's something that would put blockers in the way of any kind of rekindling? I would be scared. I would literally think to myself, this woman is dangerous. She is not balanced. So to actually allow that to be reignited really is going into dangerous territory. And one of the most chilling things that I've seen is a picture from a party that occurred on December the 2nd, 2015. So we're just coming up to the murder now. We've got Sadie and Ian in the picture, and then just behind on another table, we've got Sarah Williams. They all attended a party thrown for the staff at the Chill Factory, and there they all are, within feet of each other. That picture's taken 1 month before Sadie's brutally murdered. And the other thing to note is that Sadie went to that do knowing that her partner's mistress, albeit apparently ex-mistress, was going to be there. Again, what are we seeing about Sadie? She's a forgiving, empathic, loving, loyal human being. Someone who definitely should never have ended in the way that she did. What you also discover from the police investigation, that's the night that Sarah Williams goes out and places a GPS tracker on Ian Johnston's car. So she is premeditating. She is figuring out that she wants to know where he's living. When you think about stalking behaviour, that is about as grand as you can get, where you feel that you have a right, an entitlement to know where your ex is living, where your ex is going, where your ex's movements are. What is she planning at that point? And of course, that means that Sarah Williams very quickly gets to know where Ian Johnston and Sadie live. So even a month before, there's a strong likelihood that she's creating the plans and putting them in motion so that she can carry out the crime. I think as well, how difficult would it have been for Sadie to attend that function? Just knowing that that relationship had gone on. But she would have had no idea of the murderous intention that Williams was building up. Now, by January the 7th, 2016, we can imagine that this is a new year. Sadie's got her partner who's now moved in with her. She's feeling that her relationship's going well. It's working out. Life is working out. And she's even preparing at that point to go on holiday with Ian. He's left at that point, and she's going to meet up with him after she's got some things settled at work. So we're moving into new territory, new beginning, new year, new start, just full of hope, right? On the following evening, there's a knock on Sadie's door. Now, she's a woman alone. She's not expecting anyone. And she does debate whether she should answer it, because she doesn't expect anybody to be there, and you've always got to be conscious, haven't you, about answering the door at night. When she does, she sees a strange-looking woman stood there. She's got a cheap £3 bunch of flowers from Tesco, and she asks Sadie who she is. She says, "Are you Sadie?" Sadie confirms her identity, takes the flowers, and then the woman swiftly leaves. Instinctively, Sadie thought that was strange. She was like, number one, why would anybody bring me some £3 flowers from Tesco? That's not a delivery service. Number two, why did she need to confirm who I am? And number three, why did it feel like there was no reasoning behind this? There was no note. There was no happy birthday. There was no indication that these flowers had been left for any other reason than potentially to have figured out who her identity was. She'd also been murgled not long before and felt that maybe there was a link with that, and that concerned her. She texted Ian and said this had happened, and obviously he reassured her and told her not to worry, but also told her to be vigilant. And the other thing that she did was she emailed her best friend on January the 8th. She actually said to her that she was feeling really creeped out because this stranger had appeared and it just felt off. And her best friend said to her, "You need to tell the police. This isn't something that sounds right." Sadie chose not to. I think so many of us do that. We're put in these positions and situations where we think, I'll be all right. And that instinct is right, because that delivery literally precedes her own murder. On the night that she's killed at 7:15, she arrives home. She's been riding. She too absolutely loves riding. Literally 45 minutes after she gets back, there's a knock at her door. She goes to answer the door, and she's met by Sarah Williams. Hi YouTubers. You know me, if I can make it more real for you, I will. So I thought, you know what, weather's good, may as well take you to the scene of the crime, because it's only a few minutes away from where I live. Let me take you back. It's 2016, 14th of January, it's a Thursday night, it's around 7:30, 8 o'clock, and Sarah Williams has had enough. She wants to be with Ian Johnston, and the way that she's going to do that is by making sure that his partner, Sadie Hartley, doesn't get a chance to get in her way any longer. She premeditates and calculates the brutal slaying of Sadie, and this is the route that she took to do that. I always want to ask myself, what goes on in the mind of a killer? You know, think about this. Sarah Williams has been planning this for over a year. She's driving here on a relatively cold night. She's got a lot of time to really think about what she's doing, a lot of time to turn back, a lot of time to abandon the plan. But for whatever reason, she is so incensed that Ian Johnston is moving on with her love rival, Sadie Hartley, that she cannot bear it. Cannot bear it to the degree that, as opposed to recognising that the issue she has is with him, she wants to make it about Sadie, an innocent, loving woman, a mother, compassionate business partner. And that fuels her fury to the point that she ends up right here. Right here. You know what, all I can think of here is like the complete disconnect with the reality of what happened here a few years ago. All you've got is this gorgeous nature, this woodland, you've got a stream, that gorgeous sound of it rushing by, and yet literally to my right is where Sadie Hartley was brutally murdered. 500,000 volts coursed through her body before being stabbed multiple times. Every single vital organ basically being destroyed. And that's the house. So there you go. This is where Sadie Hartley met her end. And it's really heartbreaking because that woman was an incredible human being. She was incredible for her community. She was incredible for her family. And when you actually think, what was she guilty of? She was guilty of being a loving, compassionate partner. She was guilty of trusting a guy and believing that she was safe. Unbelievable. Now the police fit together that essentially Williams either forces her way into the property or just asks to speak to Sadie. I would argue that Sadie is one of those people that is probably willing to engage in a conversation. I've watched her daughter talk about that. Her daughter does feel that if somebody turned up to have that conversation with her, there'd be a likelihood that Sadie would usher them in. And that could also be why Sadie's back was turned as she walks away, maybe going into the kitchen to make a cuppa so the two could have a conversation. Because she's a peacemaker, that would be fitting with the way that she acts. However, there's another idea that Sadie was chased into the house or pushed into the house. Either way, her back was turned. At that point, she is stunned by a 500,000 volt stun gun. That would have completely disabled her. Imagine that kind of power coursing through your body. Imagine the shock. You've just answered the door. You might have just enabled somebody to come in, or you might be retreating because somebody's coming after you. And then all of a sudden, you're completely immobilised. There's nothing you can do. And then Sadie Williams stabs her 41 times. She stabs her so deeply that she punctures her lungs, her spleen, her spinal column. She even goes through her right eye. Sadie would likely have been conscious during this, but completely unable to move because of the stun gun. Wouldn't even been able to defend herself. She would have been completely at the mercy of this vicious, sustained and overkill attack. And it is overkill because many of those injuries were enough to have killed her without resorting to the constant aggressive attack, the annihilation approach. Sarah Williams doesn't just want to kill Sadie, she wants to completely dehumanise her. She wants to obliterate her humanness. She wants to slice her into pieces. And then Sarah Williams just gets up and leaves. So on the day of the murder at 3 p.m, Sarah Williams actually tells work that she's ill. She says she needs to go home, and she also tells David, her sugar daddy, the same story. That's clever, isn't it? She's creating an alibi so that if people ask where she is, oh, she was at home unwell. Of course, she's stupid. Can't call her anything else. She's just stupid because there's CCTV everywhere. Now at 6 p.m, she again texts David. She says that she can have a cup of tea and a sleep. So again, she's building up this idea that she's going to be in the house, but then she's seen on CCTV leaving her house. By 8 p.m, she murders Sadie. At 9:48, Williams calls Walsh and says, job done. And she asks her to meet her at a car park in Ellesmere Port. At 10:50, Sarah Williams arrives at the car park, and by 11 p.m, Kit Walsh picks her up. At 11:55 p.m, Kit Walsh walks back to the car and disposes of the weapons. Now, as I've already said, work call, the police go round, they do the welfare check, and they recognise that Sadie is either seriously injured or has been murdered. One of the police officers said it was one of the bleakest of cases that they'd ever seen in their entire career. Initially, there was a real fear that there was a potential serial killer, because this kind of a blitz killing of a random person is very strange, but does have the resonance and potential to suggest that there is somebody who is a great danger out there that could strike again. The idea that somebody could walk off the street, needlessly murder an innocent woman is terrifying. But very quickly they start to work out that they don't feel that that's it, and more that it's likely that she's been murdered by someone who's out for some kind of vengeance. They start thinking, this murder has been by somebody who knows her. I have to know, in my locality, wow, the resources that we used for this case were unprecedented. They literally drafted in police officers from everywhere. They had a huge task force. They instantly ruled out Ian Johnston because he was actually away, and they start looking at kind of what's been going on in the background of Sadie's life. Sarah Williams is pretty much put in the frame immediately. And I'll tell you why. Because her phone data is very much pinged to be around the scene of the crime in the weeks before. So even though she's got dirty phones, which we'll find out later on, she has dirty phones that her and Kit use to text each other. They think they're amazing criminals. They're absolutely dreadful, but they think they're great. They've got high arrogance. But nonetheless, they pretty instantly start to see that Sarah Williams is a potential person of interest. They start analysing CCTV footage, and they realise that a car has been acting very suspiciously on lots of occasions before the murder. And that car's registered to Sarah Williams. Now, we do know that her MO is to stalk ex-partners. So at this point, we could say, well, you know, she did that with Master A. She sat outside the house, she sent letters, but she didn't do anything dangerous to them. She didn't harm them physically. So we could argue that when the police look at that, they say, this is typical behaviour of Sarah Williams during a breakup. However, they are so diligent. And they actually make a decision to arrest her in the early hours of the 17th of January. And they take her into custody, where she literally denies everything. She denies everything. She is shocked when they actually arrest her in the early hours of the morning, don't get me wrong. She sits up in bed, looks confused, but then gathers herself together, goes in, gets booked in, kind of makes a few jokes with the police officers. She's cool, she's calm, and she's collected. And she's really concerned about her dog, because she says that her partner, who we know is a sugar daddy, goes to see her in the morning. So she knows that he'll be going to look after the dog, but she wants him to be informed that she's going to be at the police station for a while so that he can be looked after. She even talks about the breed of her dog. She talks very willingly with the police. She talks about the fact that she has had a relationship with Johnston, but she denies having any involvement with Sadie or any feelings of hostility towards her. And the police do question themselves at this moment in time, because she does seem very open, very honest. She doesn't seem scared. She's not showing any anxiety, which you would imagine if you've just gone and killed somebody and then been arrested. But the police are working so diligently behind the scenes, because the police have thousands of hours of CCTV footage to look at. You know, they're looking around the entire area. And this is when they realise that Sarah Williams didn't act alone. This is where her co-conspirator Kit walks into the picture. And suddenly the police realise there isn't just one murderer, there are two. Now, I genuinely believe that Williams and Kit believed they'd be able to get away with murder. I absolutely believe this from watching the planning. I think that they felt that there was a way to get away with the perfect murder. But they were such amateurs. I know that that isn't something I should gloat about. Murder is horrific, but there is nothing worse, is there, than a organised killer who can somehow manifest a situation where they just walk away from it. I like people who have the arrogance to believe that they're better than the police, because they are always the ones who fall on their arses so amazingly and stupendously, and that is the case here. So let's go through some of the ways that the police recognised that Sarah Williams and Kit were in fact the people who murdered Sadie. So first of all, they left a footprint at the scene. That footprint perfectly matched a pair of boots that Sarah Williams had bought weeks before. Secondly, they bought a car to carry out the murder, but they badly disguised it. Essentially, they turned a number 3 to a number 8. So one of the police officers who was investigating it and couldn't find it was like, I think that that's actually a 3. And as soon as they see that, they get the automatic CCTV number plate recognition, which means that they can track the car as it goes to a parking lot, and they can find it in a parking lot. So remember, at this point, there's not been enough time for that car to be cleaned out. Sarah Williams would have been covered in blood. The murder weapons would have been in that car with her likely. Therefore, the police know that if they get that car, the forensics are going to have a field day. It's also worth noting that when the police go to Sarah Williams' house to look after she's been arrested, every inch of it has been bleached. But the thing about every inch is that no matter how perfect your bleaching is, and you may be an adept cleaner, you're always going to leave 1 or 2 specks of dirt or blood. Because even though she had cleaned it from top to bottom, they managed to get a spot of Sadie's blood in a sink. So now, within days, remember, there's been this brutal murder that these 2 nitwits think they're going to get away with, and the police haven't just managed to trace the car that she escaped the scene in, they've now got a co-conspirator, and they've even got Sadie's blood in Sarah Williams' home, linking her directly with the death of Sadie. You see, I always think arrogance is a really bad thing where crime is concerned, and Jesus, Sarah Williams is beyond arrogant. You know, the fact that Williams used her car weeks before the murder, doing these dummy runs, repeatedly visiting the street where Sadie lived, finding bank records of the purchases of a stun gun in Germany, GPS tracking device, clothing that was going to be worn to carry out the murder. Every single piece of that evidence was recovered. But for me, and again, there is nothing comedic about this case. There isn't. But I couldn't help laughing at Katrina Walsh. Honestly, if I did not know that this was one of the most brutal killings that I've come across, and I watched Katrina Walsh being arrested, it's comedy gold. If you didn't know the brutality that lies behind it, because Jesus Christ, if you're ever going to go for a conspirator to help you in a crime, do not go for somebody like Katrina Walsh. Before she even gets told what things are happening, she's basically singing like a canary. I mean, she's like, Sarah did it, Sarah's a psychopath. Guys, Sarah's crazy. I don't have a memory, but I do remember that Sarah's a complete psychopath and she definitely probably did that. Basically, go and watch it. That's exactly what it's like. In fact, she can't help herself. She instantly starts trying to explain her part in the murders. And like I said, if it wasn't so diabolical, watching Kit Walsh arrested and charged would be comical. Because before she's even been booked in, she's suggesting that she's terrified of Williams, that she believes Williams has murdered somebody. She suggests that she's got a 3-day memory, which means that she doesn't actually know whether she was involved in the crime at all. Now, as far as defences go, wouldn't take very long to pick a hole in it, would it? So let me just get that right. So Kit, you're saying that you only have a 3-day memory. Yes. But you're saying that you think that Sarah has murdered Sadie. Yes. How have you remembered that? I don't know. I mean, it's not going to be very hard, is it, for a prosecution to start picking holes in that? And it gets better as we go further on. But essentially, at this moment in time, Kit is just desperately trying to say, I am a defenceless woman who has been bullied into a scenario that I could not avoid by my hideous psychopathic friend Sarah Williams. I've had absolutely nothing to do with this. But bear in mind, the police at this point have got a very firm case. They've got CCTV going to the scene of the crime. Shortly, they've got DNA forensic evidence. They've got video footage of them on a boat going to Germany to buy the taser that obviously stunned Sadie. And this again, the pièce de résistance. The thing about Kit is she isn't the brightest tool in the box when it comes down to defence. Because of course, she's arguably said that she has absolutely no memory. She's got this 3-day memory. She's a riding instructor, so she can teach and remember that. But she's not very good at remembering details of brutal murders. Unfortunately, that alibi kind of gets thrown out when the police discover that one of the great things that Kit likes to do is to keep really up-to-date diaries with pretty much every single thought process that she's ever had in the world, including those about murdering Sadie, and suggesting that she's really excited about it. She's thrilled. In fact, on one night, she and Sarah Williams had been plotting the murder that she was so excited she had to have a Jack Daniels to calm herself down. So this mask of, I'm just a defenceless person with mental health issues, is starting to slip pretty hugely. Now, unlike Sarah Williams, who pretty much after that first interview where she was very open, happily chatting, as soon as she's charged with murder, she goes silent. She answers no comment to every question. I don't know why people do that. To me, these days, if you answer no comment, it means you're guilty. I'm one of those people. You would have to convince me in a jury. If somebody had gone no comment on every question, I'd be like, guilty. And they'd be like, Emma, you've not heard the evidence. I'd be like, guilty. That's all I'm saying. They've gone for the no comment, always guilty. That would prejudice me. So to some degree, I don't think these days that no comment is a positive thing for anybody to use. It used to be, it used to cause cases to fold, but the law has since rightly changed. But nonetheless, that's what she does. However, Katrina Walsh is the opposite. She's like, how can I help you? I need to help you. I'm going to be as good as possible because that is going to make you think, oh, poor Katrina Walsh. She was just some poor person dragged along by this psychopathic killer. And she goes for that over-ingratiating, what can I do for you? And she basically takes the police to find the murder weapons. She takes them where she's actually buried them. She's put horse manure on top of them. She takes them to where the stun gun has been dumped, to where the 9-inch knife, still with Sadie's blood on, has been dumped, and also lots of other incriminating evidence. They also are shown where the phones are, where they've been purchased from, and obviously they have the information about them communicating about the murder. So, as far as well-planned crimes go, this goes down in history as one of the worst. They were completely unprepared for the amazing task force of the police. Secondly, for the desire for justice, because there is nothing like an angry police officer. They are like a dog with a bone. Sadie came from a loving, wonderful family. Her daughter had to get a phone call while she was on a holiday to be told that her mother had died in such a brutal fashion. And those police officers from day dot wanted to make sure that whoever had done that got justice served. And they absolutely wanted that for Sadie and for her family. Now, they have a strong case. The police are in a position where these two fabulously close best friends, these loyal best friends in Kit and Sarah Williams, suddenly are screaming that the other person is responsible, blaming each other for the murder. So this is great because now we know that they are both involved, and this is beautiful for a prosecution because they don't really care who's screaming about the other. They care that they're admitting that they were involved. That's really the most important formula in this case. So whilst they might be heaping responsibility onto the other person, the very fact that this folie à deux has occurred demonstrates that they were involved. Nothing like a well-planned murder, is there, where apparent friends pretty much instantly become enemies. And the reality for the jury is none of this mattered, because as far as they were concerned, both were guilty as hell. And the police realised that far from this being a blitz killing in the moment of passionate rage, because it could have been a moment of deep psychosis, where Sarah Williams sat outside that house, had had a massive break from reality, and just in a fit of rage, of passion, had gone and destroyed Sadie. Again, would still have been guilty of murder, but would have been more around mental health, but no. They were able to track back that this murder was calculated 18 months earlier. It was a cold and calculated execution, 18 months in the planning. This means that that Christmas, where you see that picture of Sadie, Ian Johnston and Sarah Williams, that Sarah knew she was going to kill her. Sarah Williams knew that Sadie had only weeks to live. Now, the psychology of Sarah Williams is interesting, because when people have obsessive personalities, when they're lusting after another person who then rejects them, the instant attraction that they've had, then followed with the lust, followed by the obsession, tends to see the love object, the person that they're interested in, as almost a reflection of themselves. So to some degree, Sarah Williams with Ian Johnston isn't falling in love with him, they're falling in love and lust with themselves. The love is essentially narcissistic, and she has this extreme narcissism, this self-assured belief, this worthiness of love that she feels that she deserves, with this deep insecurity and self-loathing beneath it, so that when people reject her, those feelings are completely unmanageable. They're constantly requiring adoration from others to counteract that lack of self-worth. So the psychology of Williams is terrifying. And because of that strong feeling of rejection, essentially it creates this obsessive desire to annihilate the thing that's hurt them. And even though realistically it's Ian Johnston doing the hurting, because she loves him or loves the idea of him, because she sees him as a reflection of who she is, she can't kill him, so she'll kill the thing that stands in her way. Think about it, in the film Fatal Attraction, you've got Michael Douglas playing Gallagher, rejects his lover Alex Forrest, who's played by Glenn Close, and she rapidly descends into this emotional and psychological chaos. Her self-image of perfection and irresistibility feels so under attack that she's prepared to kill in an effort to keep it intact. So these bunny boiling characters have this way of rationalising and justifying acts where they don't have to feel remorse, and they don't have to accept responsibility for hurting others. Similarly to Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction, Williams denies responsibility for the murders of Sadie Hartley. She shows absolutely no remorse throughout the trial. It's likely that in her mind, all of her actions are justified, and that's because of that deep wound to her ego. So the cross-examination that occurs when they're prosecuting her shows that even though she has no remorse, her ego is so driven that she feels entitled to her actions. She's shown to be very intelligent, resourceful, she's manipulative, and without doubt, she's a pathological liar. She regards herself as a victim rather than a perpetrator. And let's be honest, when you think about psychopaths, that's exactly what they do. The distress of others is a foreign and insignificant land. It's one of those things that they just can't reach into. They can't experience it because the empathy doesn't exist. Now, when she's found guilty, she is given a 30-year jail term. But let me make it clear, it's not a 30-year jail term that will be halved or made to serve 2/3 of. That is a 30-year fixed jail term. She will not get out before that. Katrina Walsh, she gets 25 years. Again, there will not be any allowing out for good behaviour, because the judge considered them both terrifying and disturbing in their behaviours. When you look back, the planning for this crime began in 2014. This is when they start referring to Sadie as bitch In June 2015, they're seriously considering murdering her. In August 2015, what you might not know is that Sarah Williams actually tries to get Kit Walsh's ex-husband, Kevin, to murder Sadie. And in the same month, Kit writes in her diary, as I was saying before, wow, I may get to be instrumental in helping remove the awful woman. This may happen. Wow, I'm unexpectedly excited by it. I was so buzzing, so much, I needed a southern comfort to wind down a bit. I've got no moral qualms, just a serious don't let us get caught twinge. Ugh. So as I said, Williams gets 30 years, Walsh gets 25 years. And this is what Mr. Justice Turner said. And I love a summing up. I really do. I love a good summing up because I hear the tone of justice. And Mr. Justice Turner never disappoints. And I've read many of Mr. Justice Turner's transcripts and I enjoy them because I always get that feeling that he is damning in his comments and that he knows that he's serving justice correctly. He said, Sarah Williams, over a period of about 18 months, you plotted the murder of a woman whose only crime was to love the man you wanted for yourself. But let no one make the mistake of thinking this was a crime of passion. It was a crime of obsession, of arrogance, of barbarity. But above all, it was a crime of pure evil. And over that period of 18 months of scheming, you found in Katrina Walsh both a fellow spirit and enthusiastic participant. You, Walsh, are every bit as morally degenerate as Williams. No wonder you've been the best of friends over so many years. You've so much in common, being not merely indifferent to the suffering you inflict on others, but positively revelling in it. The evidence in this case as a whole, and your diary entries in particular, Walsh, make me sure that your motive in getting involved was the depraved satisfaction to be gained from helping to kill another human being. You knew all along that this was no game or fantasy. Sadie Hartley died for your amusement. Of course, the plots involved many labyrinth twists and turns, but as you were both fully aware, this was no fiction. On the contrary, it was from an early stage leading to one and only conclusion, the well-rehearsed and savage butchery of a blameless woman. Then yondering over and over elaborate planning, serving to heighten your pleasure by deliciously postponing your ultimate and inevitable gratification. Doubtless, the features of secret agent style intrigue carried with them elements of fantasy. But this was no harmless world of make-believe. It was a game of death. He went on to say, I have read the dignified and poignant statements of Harry and Charlotte Hartley, Ian Johnson and Julie Taylor. They reveal Sadie Hartley to be a loving mother, partner, and a woman dedicated to achieving and promoting advancements in improvement in the provision of intensive care medicine and in the areas of haematology and infection. The contrast between her life-affirming generosity of spirit and your vile, destructive, resentful and self-regard and hypocrisy could hardly be starker. Mr. Justice Turner also went on to say that this case was more closely redolent of a clinical assassination than a personal killing. The period of many months over which the meticulous planning took place reveals not only the highest level of culpability, but it also gave both of you every opportunity to reflect on the evil you were about to perpetrate. These opportunities you repeatedly chose to ignore. The method of murder you adopted involved not only taking a knife to the scene, but invading your victim's home at night and slaughtering her like an animal. First, incapacitating her with a massive electric shock to the head, and then hacking and slashing her to death with the most unimaginable ferocity. He also noted, neither of you have shown the slightest remorse about what you did to Sadie Hartley or to the family and friends she left behind. With you, Williams, resorting to arrogant insults and you, Walsh, putting on an ostentatious and devious show of mental impairment to the police, trying in a desperate attempt to avoid the consequences of what you have done. He said, I am in no doubt, Walsh, that such cooperation you gave to the police in leading them to the evidence was entirely motivated by a desire to save your own skin. I think we can all agree with that, can't we? He also said, in relation to Walsh, I have to bear in mind that you did not physically carry out the murder or be present when it happened. No doubt though, from the contents of your diary, you acted under the delusion that as long as you would not be at the sharp end, you would not go to prison. How wrong you were. I find that but for your support and encouragement, there is a very real chance that the killing would never have occurred. Time and time again, you provided the camouflage upon which Williams relied. You were a perfect partner in crime, loyal, immoral, and perhaps most welcome of all, anonymous. You spent days and hours and weeks plotting the death of Sadie Hartley, and which your diaries reveal you derived considerable pleasure and satisfaction. Shocking, isn't it? Shocking. So even though the judge was very aware that Walsh was not actually at the scene, he still gave her 25 years that she has to spend in prison. That was to reflect the extent of her involvement. Mr. Justice Turner also, when sentencing, made it clear that they would serve the entirety of their sentences. He basically said there was no guarantee that they would be released once the minimum term of 30 years and 25 years had passed, and it would be for the parole board at that point to say if they would be safe to be free. And even then he made it clear, your freedom will be relative, because I'll make sure that you're on licence for the rest of your lives. And if you commit any other offence or you breach your licence in any way agreed, you will be recalled to prison and you will be there for the rest of your life. That is as harsh as it gets in British law. There are very few people that are in prison for their entire lives. You know, we've got a few, Rose West, Joanna Dennehy. These are people who will spend the rest of their days in prison. But for the most part, restoration, reparation, and an opportunity to live freely is something that we grant people in the UK. But these two, it may well be that they never leave prison. And I really believe that that sentence demonstrates just how powerful the loss of Sadie Hartley was, both to her family and to her community. This was a woman who was doing amazing work. She was an incredible human being. She was incredibly loved by the people around her. And we have to absolutely note that she was totally innocent in this. She hadn't been in a relationship with Sarah Williams. She didn't know Kit Walsh. She was an innocent bystander. She was a good human being. And I think that when the judge served that sentence, he did it with relish. Because those two women, believe me, albeit that it was a folie à deux, and maybe they wouldn't have carried out this crime if they hadn't met, but that's irrelevant. Because they did meet. And that folie à deux did occur. And Sadie Hartley doesn't get to live the rest of her life happily, in love with her partner, bringing up her children, seeing her grandchildren. That family has been ripped apart by a pernicious, obsessive, dreadful couple of people who, to all intents and purposes, had no right to even be in their world. Imagine the leap that that family has had to take, going from this perfect family unit where Sadie Hartley was known as this incredibly loving parent, this peaceful, compassionate woman, this much loved, loyal colleague, to knowing that she spent her last seconds lay on the floor, defenseless, being shredded by a woman that she had only seen occasionally, who had already tried to break up her relationship, that she bore no malice to, that she potentially even invited into her home to make peace with. Could you get a bigger contrast? Personally, I hope that Kit Walsh and Sarah Williams spend every single day in prison for the rest of their lives. And I hope it's hard, and I hope it hurts, because a narcissist doesn't like being locked up, and a narcissist doesn't like not having control. And the great thing about prison is she won't have very much at all. And those womanly wiles that she used to entrap her sugar daddy and all those others, they really won't have the same power where she is now. I know this doesn't make any of it better. I know that for Sadie Hartley's family, it's just cold justice, but at least it is justice. I hope you found this case interesting. Like I said, it feels very close to home. And when I look at somebody like Sadie Hartley, she reminds me of myself as a mum, and therefore I feel that real connection with her. She should still be living her best life. She deserved it. She'd earned it. And again, to all of you listening, it's always worth looking at those variables that make people who just seem like they're needy and a little bit obsessive be seen in a more stalker-based light, because undoubtedly Sarah Williams was a stalker and she had serious problems within her psyche. So the consequence of this is, if anybody acts in that way around you, take it seriously. The same as if somebody delivers flowers to you and they're from a shop and they ask for your identity, get in touch with the police. My belief is always go with that instinct. Never think you're wasting people's time, because in these kind of cases, those actions, they might just save your life. Tune in with me next time. I'll be covering another case. If you've enjoyed this, please subscribe and I'll see you then.